Today I'm going to talk about new media and social transformation in a much more kind of mundane, I think, but no less important way by looking at what I'm calling techno-sustenance in the Chinese countryside. And in general, I should say at the start that I'm taking a really broad view when I use this term techno-sustenance, and I'm looking at as the conjunctures between technology, power, and sustaining or not of various types of relational dynamics, so be they economic, cultural, emotional, or what have you. My talk is based on some exploratory research in Shandong province among 4 villages last summer, where I was looking at people's engagement with mobile phones and the internet and how this engagement intersects with their migration experience, their gender, and their generation, as well as how it's situated in the structural realities of the Chinese countryside, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I should say at the beginning as well that rather than looking at impacts of technology or positing technology as an automatic solution for issues of sustainability, I begin with the notion that technology is never separate from the cultural, the social, or the economic. And so technology use can provide diverse types of sustenance, including sustaining inequitable configurations of power. So like I said, my view of techno-sustenance is very broad. Okay, so my 2 main, am I clicking this right? Yeah, I researched technology, but I can't use it apparently. Which button is it?
Not sure, maybe just click on.
Just click on this one?
Yeah.
Okay, that was easy. All right, so I'm going to go through that stuff up there really fast because I know my time is really limited, and focus on 2 themes. The first one is how technology sustains or challenges gendered and generational power dynamics, and whether and how technology is linked to economic opportunities in the countryside. Okay, so just as some really quick background, probably everyone in here is aware of, due to the rising inequality and urban, rural, and regional disparity, for the last several years, the Chinese government has put forth this notion of the new socialist countryside. And there have been numerous sorts of, programs around that. But what I'm interested in is this rural informatization. So this focus on, ICT structures and access and development in the countryside that has increased over the last few years. But it's not just state initiatives that are important, but market imperatives as well, because telecom companies like China Mobile have been forced to go to rural areas because urban areas are saturated, right? So if they want new users, new customers, they've got to go out to the rural areas. And so if we look just quickly at some stats, we can see that there are more rural internet users in the countryside than there used to be. There's probably more than 975 million mobile phone subscribers by now, since that stat was at the end of last year. But I think one of the interesting things is that it's estimated that between 15 and, for rural residents between the age of 15 and 55, excuse me, I cannot believe that's my cell phone, sorry. That's really embarrassing. Okay, so for rural residents between the ages of 15 and 55, 90% of them now are supposed to have mobile phones. Okay, the background that I'm going to go through in like 30 seconds, but there's all the references if you want them. I think we know a lot about rural to urban migrants in the city and how they use new media, for social networking, for potentially economic enhancement. We know a lot about returned migrants to the countryside in general, the special case of returned migrant women, in other words, the kind of special circumstances and challenges they face, a little bit about rural informatization projects, but not that much about how individuals are incorporating technologies into their everyday lives without the aid of some kind of agency. Some positive outcomes have been found in terms of sustaining social networks and transferring modern values and modern technology and modern ways of thinking to the countryside, thanks to Elise's research. I can't find her. There she is. Okay. But I still think there's a lot of questions that we can ask. And again, my focus is on sustenance as it intersects with generation and migration experience and gender and power. Okay, so real quick, the way I view technology, again, I reject a kind of view of impacts, and I look at technology as not just the object, not just the cell phone, but all these multiple relations and investments, both financial and emotional, and discourses and everything that is articulated or linked to the technology to form an assemblage, but I don't really need to use that term. But in other words, looking at technology not just as the object, and focusing on what I call socio-techno practices, which is how technology is integrated into prior cultural and social practices, but also opens up new spaces and possibilities. And again, practices, this term I use very broadly, not just what people do, but discourses, understandings, and so on. Okay, my method, I'm going to let you look at that slide for like 10 seconds because I don't have time to get into it, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. All right, so let me go to my first theme. To illustrate technology and gendered and generational power dynamics, I want to start with the Liu family, who lived in one of the more relatively developed villages in my fieldwork. This is Shandong, so Shandong, so this is certainly more developed than some of the villages I've been in, like Anhui or Gansu or something like that. Now, Mr. Liu, who was 38, he had various migration experiences in the 90s, and since 2001, he had been raising pigs. And at first, he lost a lot of money, then he broke even, and then he had actually been doing quite well over the last couple of years. Now, he also kind of always wanted to stay ahead of the curve in different realms, and so in 1998, he told me his home was the first in the village to have a landline, and in 2002, he was also the first one to have his own mobile phone. You don't actually see Mr. Liu here because I did not get IRB approval for his photo. So anyway, now when I met him, he, after almost 10 years, was still just using a basic phone, okay? No camera, no internet function, okay? He's not reading microblogs or anything like that. He was just using his phone for voice calls for his business. And he had disconnected the family's landline in 2006 to save money. This left his wife without any kind of telecommunication advice for over 2 years. And when I asked her, well, what happened if you needed to make a phone call, he interjected and said, oh, she could use mine. And I'm like, oh, okay, right? So she was a bit marginalized in that regard, but he did eventually buy her phone. It did have a camera. She said she didn't know how to use it, so she didn't use it. She didn't text message much because her friends couldn't always read the characters, so hers was, again, just a very basic function, using it for phone calls. Now, when I met the family, they had recently bought a brand new notebook computer for their son as a reward for passing the high school entrance exam. I am now on their screensaver, in case you can see that. Now, when he was going to go to school, the computer was going to stay in the home. He was going to return from school every 2 weeks on weekends, and that's when he would use the computer. Mr. Liu wanted the computer to stay in the home because he wanted to, for himself, to be able to learn how to use it, to go online, to try to check info on pigs and prices and so on. Now, at the time I met them, they'd been waiting for like 2 weeks for the broadband to be connected, and they were not sure when that was going to happen. So I give you this experience of the Liu family because I think that it's really representative of these gendered and generational power dynamics that emerged around technology in my research among this age group, like these people in their late 30s, possibly early 40s, who I almost want to call like a 1.5 generation migration worker. I mean, they're certainly not the second generation that we know are just saturated in all these new media technologies, and they're not the earliest migrants either. So. But definitely Mr. Liu's prior migration experience, right, his access to social and economic capital, his early adoption of fixed line and then mobile telephony reflected both his entrepreneurial spirit, but I think also the patriarchal norms that have benefited him but relegated his wife, somewhat to the margins in terms of household decision-making and telephony. And there were a lot of families that I spoke with that had this similar situation. The man had the cell phone first, cut off the landline, left his wife, without anything, but, insisted it was no big deal. Even when the wife finally got a phone, then it would be a very basic model. And this was true even with, that surprised me, this was true even with women who'd had migration experience, that it wasn't only until the last year or two, or maybe 3, that they got their own cell phone. Now, interestingly, and I think this is really creative use of cell phones, women who were functionally illiterate were still using cell phones, and the way they got around, inputting characters and stuff is here she just used 0 Ling for a name, so substituting these simple characters for these more complicated ones, and then relying solely on voice calls. Okay, so one last thing I want to say, and then I really need to move on. Just in terms of thinking about technology transfer among here, it's not that technology is being brought into the village by returned migrants, although that certainly happens, but we have parents who have worked hard so that their kids do not have to farm, right? They put a lot of emphasis on their child's education, and they have high expectations for these kids to go to college, okay, in this village. Again, unlike other villages that I've visited in more remote provinces. And technology access, usage, and skills are seen as really crucial to this success. But in the same time as buying the technology for the kids, then that's the impetus for them to start to learn to gain some of these skills that we've been talking about. Okay, I'm going to move real quick. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I want to turn now to the issue of economic sustenance and technology, and to consider whether and how skills learned through migration transfer to the village and are linked to economic opportunities, and how technology does or doesn't play a role in this. And I'm going to illustrate with just two quick examples from my fieldwork. The first is Wang. Okay, she was a 29-year-old woman from a village that was not too far outside from Qingdao. And I think when you look at it, you can see difference compared to the village that I just showed you, right? Especially in terms of the roads. So she had a lot of different jobs in Qingdao, working in a hotel, working in a grocery store, and so on. And she told me, you know, here we go out to migrate just for the experience. We could probably stay at home and make more money. Okay, so for her and her friends, it was about getting some experience and coming back to the village. She did come back in 2005 and got married, and she and her husband started this internet cafe right up there. And they did that because there was a seafood processing factory nearby, and they thought it would be, you know, a good way to get customers. So they're doing quite well, although with more competition from new internet cafes opening up. She's also recently opened up this little tiny clothing store next door. She, I will say, is the only one who told me that she thought she could transfer skills learned through migration back to her village. I want to contrast her really fast with Xiaolin. Xiaolin was from Anhui province. She'd gone to Shenzhen to work. While in Shenzhen, working in a supermarket, she was made to feel like, you know, she had no quality, right? The whole Suzhou discourse she had really internalized, and went to vocational school to study graphic design. Met her future husband there. They moved back to his village, the most remote village that I was in Shandong, and they decided to open up a computer store, okay, to sell computers, because I thought that would be an untapped market. Unfortunately, this business encountered some unexpected problems. So the one problem was all of the young adults who would have been their customers were out of the village. They were out laboring, basically. Second problem was they had to keep the price so low because rural customers, their customers did not want to pay that much for a computer, so they didn't make very much profit on each computer. The third one, and I have a long quote here, I'm not going to read it, but basically what she's saying is they would go and they would install the computer in someone's house, they would drive all the way there, hook it up, drive all the way back, and then get a call, it's not working, all right? They would drive all the way back, and yes, indeed it was working, but the person didn't know how to work the program. Give them a little bit of training on the program, drive back, get a call, it's not working, okay, and on and on and on. So, so she called, you know, these useless calls, you know, cost them a lot of time and money, and so eventually, I mean, they were obviously good for their rural customers who were getting some free training, but eventually they closed their shop. And instead, they are going to open a small convenience store. So while Xiaolin still, you know, I said, can you transfer the skills to the village? And she said, no way, I can't be a graphic designer here. And yes, that's true. She can't be a graphic designer in her village. But if we think about, you know, other resources, skills, abilities, finances learned in a kind of broader way, I think we could say, yes, she probably is bringing something back to the village. But anyway, to close, because I'm out of time, I think when we consider these two vignettes and my earlier discussion of these how age and gender intersect with technology use in the countryside, we see how socio-techno practice manifest, or how technology is articulated to numerous social and cultural processes and power relations that are as much about individuals, okay, there's all this emphasis on individual quality, right, but also structures and structural impediments. And so in people's everyday lives, numerous elements at the individual, household, village, and larger societal level are connected to technology use, and in turn reproduce these elements and constrain or enable these, you know, what I'm calling these various types of sustenance. So That's all I have to say. Thank you.